you know, we always think we come up with these great ideas. And so we were brainstorming. And I think Betty came up with this idea. She said, well, when we stop in May, let's just not do anything for about a month or so. And that way we'll kind of get them coming back for more. So that's what we're going to do. Tonight's the last night for about a month. And then we've got 3 classes that are left. The first class will be on June the 10th. And it will be the 75th, June the 6th. I'm sorry, what was I thinking of? The 75th anniversary of D-Day. I've got a little video clip I want to show you about the class, a vision of what the class is going to look like. So Jay, we'll start the video in just a second.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the Great Crusade. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
It's been a while since a general has said we're going to declare we're going to win. And as I've had a chance to study this over the last 6 months or so, it's an amazing story. Our class that night will be told through the eyes of a lot of it will be told through the eyes of President Eisenhower before he was president, but it'll be much before he was president. I didn't know a lot about him, but just one of the leadership dynamics that were involved in what he did were incredible. And I hope you'll come that night and join the celebration for the big win for our country. On June 10th, which is a Monday, we will have our class on the state certified Open Records, Open Meetings Act that'll be here. And that'll be put on by the auditor of the state of Ohio. And for those of you who saw the news today, you noticed that the Gang of 5 councilman, can you believe what happened today? That he got, they said, we don't have enough to charge you and hold you in contempt for what you did. And that's got to be the worst lesson to people like us, taxpayers, citizens, of almost anything that could ever happen. To do that to citizens and not be held accountable for what you did. It's really, really a wrong thing. Those of you who are citizen activists, you should come, because if you want to be responsible and in charge of what goes on in your cities and communities, it's important you understand the law, because if you don't, then you'll kind of be rolled on occasionally. A friend of mine has a battle going on in the city he's living in, and he sent a public records request four weeks ago to the city, and he hasn't heard anything. And he said, what can I do about it? I said, come to the class. The class will teach you what you can do. It's 3 hours and 15 minutes, and I urge you to come. It's a fun class. And then the last class of the semester will be June the 12th, when we will be talking about Reagan's famous Brandenburg Gate speech that happened in 1989. will be showing the speech, and then we'll have a gentleman who lived behind the Iron Curtain come and give his reflections on what it was like to live in Germany during that time. So we've got 3 great classes that'll take place in June, have a great May off. And with that in mind, I want to introduce our team to you tonight. We've got Bill Roll, our treasurer, back there. We're glad to have him. Give Bill a round of applause. We have got we've got our producer, Jay Grunke, in the back, who's going to be taking care of things tonight. Welcome, Jay. Thank you. And we have got our great executive director, Betty Overstreet, who's going to help us with the door prize tonight. We also have 2 board members with us tonight. Dan Clark, who's back there in the red, is that a Buckeye hat you've got going on? Let's give him a round of applause. And Ken Bowman, who's here tonight, right here, who's been a huge help this semester to us. And we're so glad to see the Feichners here tonight. They are great Americans. Welcome. We're glad to have you. So let's have our guest draw the first one. So what we're going to give away tonight is, we haven't given away anything from Frame USA yet. This is a real barnwood frame made from wood down in Texas and Oklahoma. So the number would be, I can't read it.
425.
How about 425? 425. Anybody have 425? Okay, let's go on to the next one. How about 442? 442, right back here. Congratulations. Your name is? Your name?
Terry Kemper.
Terry. Welcome, Terry. Glad you could join us. And we also have, if you weren't able to join us for our last class, we've got just a couple books left. We're going to give a book away on this Child of the Forest. How about 455? Right there. Congratulations. I believe you. And now Betty will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Dan. Before I introduce our speaker, I know we have new people here tonight. I think no, there we go. We have some new people here tonight, so I just want to give you a brief history about Empower You. Empower You was founded in 2011 by Dan Reganol, who is also the CEO of Frame USA here. But Dan's vision was to have classes on a diverse number of topics. And so we strive to do that every semester. We do have 2 semesters of about 20 classes in the spring and 20 in the fall. We also put all of our classes online within a day or 2 after the class. So if you can't make it to a class, you can go online. It's free. Somebody asked me that the other day. Well, how much does it cost to do that? It never occurred to me that anybody thought we charged, but you can go online and watch those for free. If you can't make it to a class, you can also sign up online about 5 or 10 minutes before class time and watch it online. Also, we are a free university, powered only by donations. So towards the end of each class, we do pass around our little red buckets. If you like what we do, we appreciate any donation that you would give. It does help keep us going. And we also welcome any feedback that you have on any of our classes, good, bad, indifferent, whatever. And we also like to have suggestions for classes. Some of our classes we put on do come from suggestions in the audience. And you can go to info@empoweryouohio.org and leave your comments or any suggestions for classes. And next, so we're ready to introduce our speaker tonight. Al Tuchfarber is a professor emeritus of political science from the University of Cincinnati. He's the owner of Tuchfarber Political Economics, LLC blogger, and he also has the Tuchfarber Report. In 2014 and 2016, Tuchfarber predicted the American election results with great accuracy, unlike a large majority of the pundits. He did so because he has a deep understanding of the voters' priorities and thinking, as well as of the rapidly changing coalitions that make up the American political parties. As a political economic analyst and author of the Tuchfarber Report, Al brings you insights and forecasts that you will not find elsewhere. Please give Al a warm welcome.
Thanks, Betty. Everybody hear me okay? It's really a pleasure to be here, and thanks to Dan for starting this, and Jay and the others for doing the hard work. I love to give talks like this. It's a real joy for me, and I get your feedback is extremely important to me, because by listening to your questions, I learn. I learn what you're interested in, how you talk about things, the words you use. And so what I do when I give a talk like this is I have a lot more Q&A time than most speakers do. Usually I'll devote a third to half of my time to Q&A, and I'm going to ask you in advance to ask questions about what I say tonight, but also you can ask me about almost anything that's got to do with American politics, including the craziness that's going on right now. And I can also speak to a lot of global politics and global economic situations as well, if you wanted to ask about that. Let's start with some background stuff. And I look around the room and I look at the ages here, and we've got people from maybe 40 to 70s or so. I'm 72 myself, so I've been around for a while. And it's really important that we understand the coalitions that make up our two parties now, because it's quite different than what we grew up with. And many of us still think it's the way it was, say, before about the year 2000, and it's not. And those changes have had an enormous impact on where we are today politically and where we're going. So where were we, and where are we now? During the whole time that we were growing up as a group, the Democratic Party coalition was made up of lower income folks, minorities, and the working class, the white working class, differentiating them, of course, from the minority groups. That was the coalition that came together at the beginning of the New Deal and was totally dominant in American politics for 70 years, from 1930 to, with a break during the Reagan years, and then continuing on until about the year 2000. The Republican Party was the upscale party. It was the middle class, and it was the upper middle class, the so-called country club party, the party of the rich, the party of the well-educated, the party of the high-income professionals. That's the past. Those are not the coalitions anymore. They've changed in very important ways. So the Democrats today, they're still the lower earning, low income folks, defined as under 30,000. That's not everybody. These are averages. But the vast majority of the under $30,000 a year folks, they vote Democratic. And that's how we're defining it, is how they vote. Minorities, overwhelmingly Democratic, 90% to 10% among African American voters, Democrat to Republican. Among Hispanics and Asians, it's about 2-to-1 Democratic. So overwhelming support in the minority communities for the Democratic Party. What has been a huge change, crucial change, and you've probably seen this with friends and relatives. The upscale, upper middle class, upper class group is now split between the parties. And especially upscale, well-educated women are now Democratic. They're now about 60-40 Democratic to Republican. That is a huge change. 20 years ago, it was the reverse, or maybe even 2-to-1 Republican. And it's moving, it continues to go in that direction. And the reason is mainly social issues. Abortion, gay rights, other sorts of social issues, where the upscale women say, no, I don't like the conservatism of the Republican Party on those social issues. I might like Republican positions on other issues, but I don't like the social positions. And so now I'm a Democratic voter. That's a substantial move towards the Democrats. But think about this. In the year 2000, we essentially had a tied election. Gore won the popular vote by 0.5%. Bush won the electoral vote because he won by 579 votes in Florida. It was that close. In 2016, we also had a tied election. So Hillary won the popular vote by 2.1%, but Trump won easily because he won the key upper Midwest Great Lakes states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and also I count Pennsylvania in there as well because it's very similar. How did that happen? If all these women are moving to the Democratic Party, and if there's more and more Hispanic and Asian voters, what happened that made Trump a winner? And this is crucially important. I can't emphasize this enough. The white working class has abandoned the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party abandoned them and their issues. So the white working class is now substantially 2-to-1 a Republican political base, as is the middle class, and most, but not all, upper middle class men tend to be Republican, but many of their wives are not. It leads to some very interesting conversations or non-conversations at home. And I've had a lot of those guys come up to me over the years and say, Al, can't you do anything about the Republicans and the social issues? And I said, wait a minute, you don't understand. Half of the Republican base is Republican because of the social issues. That's not going to change. So that is a crucial change that has happened over the last 20 years or so. Now, a lot of people assume that Donald Trump caused that change. That's totally wrong. Donald Trump is a product, an effect of that change, not a cause of that change. It was the white working class that nominated Trump in 2016. It was the white working class that put him over the top in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and other states. And so there's this old joke about if you want to be a leader, get in front of a parade. Well, Trump did exactly that. Not that, he didn't have his own ideas and he's done a lot of really good stuff, but he got in front of a parade that was already underway. And finally, the closing point of this particular section of the talk is that unless the Democrats get back a substantial chunk of that white working class vote, they cannot win in 2020. They cannot win because that movement to the Republicans continues, just like the movement to the Democrats by the upscale women continues. But the white working class is a huge percentage. It's about 40% of the whole voter population. So they have to get that back in order to win. And that's one of the arguments that's being made for Joe Biden as the nominee, because historically he's been popular with that particular group. And you can ask questions about the details of the candidates later if you want. So, second major topic is the Republican Civil War. We're here tonight to talk about the Democratic Civil War, but let's talk about the Civil War in the Republican Party that happened roughly between 2009 and 2016. It was the Tea Party revolt. And probably, I know a number of you were involved in that. The Tea Party Republicans, and about 85% of people that identify with the Tea Party also call themselves Republicans. So there was the revolt of the unique Tea Party movement. And I noticed the tea up here from a session a week and a half ago or so, where people were asked to bring in tea to celebrate the anniversary of the Tea Party. And the revolt was the grassroots conservatives, especially fiscal conservatives and small government libertarian-oriented conservatives, who revolted against the elitist Republican establishment. And it was a revolt that had two major components to it. One was a battle for power within the party. Who was going to control endorsements? Who was going to hold the party official positions? Who was going to make the rules? You know, classic process stuff, but very, very important stuff. And Dan was referring earlier to a class coming up about, rules in legislatures and other situations. Those rules can be extremely important, as we'll talk about later tonight. The other big battle was the battle over particular policies. And in particular, it was big government versus small government, and heavy-handed government versus freedom. And the best example of big government, even under Republicans, was TARP, which was the bailouts of the banks and the auto companies and things, and the stimulus package, which effectively wasted $1 trillion. $1 trillion, that's 1,000 billion. That didn't do much good at all to bring back the economy. So those were the two big policy issues to get fought over, and also then the process stuff. That Civil War is essentially over. There's always battles within political parties, always. That goes with the territory. But the brutal, nasty war effectively ended with Donald Trump, because he represents, in a lot of ways, the base of the party and a lot of the ideas of the Tea Party movement. And we see that in tax cuts, and we see that in massive deregulation and things. So that Civil War is effectively over. And ironically, that Civil War pretty much ended at exactly the point that the Democratic Civil War really started to kick off. And there, again, I'm going to emphasize, there's always policy battles and power battles within any political party. We have what we call mass political parties. They're very, very big, diverse groups. And another name for them is big tent institutions. And in American politics, because of the nature of our system, where it's a winner-take-all system, whoever gets the most votes for president, or in the case of president's electoral votes, or for running for congressmen like Steve Chabot or Wenstrup, or the senators, Senator Sherrod Brown or Rob Portman, whoever gets the most votes in those races wins. And that takes a massive, diverse coalition of people. And so when we talk, our political parties are quite diverse, and that's true of both the Republicans and the Democrats. And that's also why third parties do extremely poorly in American politics. There's only been one successful third party in the history of the country. One. It's the Republican Party in the 1850s. And it formed because the Whig Party and the Democratic Party were split internally over slavery. They had internal battles over slavery versus abolishing slavery. The Republican Party emerged as the abolitionist anti-slavery party. And again, that is the only case in all of American history where there's been a major success of a third party. And I'll be glad to take questions about the prospects of a third party as we move into 2020, but you already kind of get the gist of my general thoughts on that. So the Democratic Civil War, the kickoff was really the battle between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders is a self-declared democratic socialist, small d, small s. And he means it seriously. He literally took his honeymoon in the Soviet Union. He's not even officially a member of the Democratic Party. Although in order to actually win the nomination this time, he has to run as a member and become a member, and he said he will do that. And basically, but don't think of Bernie just as a radical, and he is a radical, but in a lot of ways, Bernie's support was support of an outsider, of an anti-establishment candidate, revolting against not just him, but his followers, revolting against the Democratic establishment. The Democratic establishment had decided that Hillary was going to be the nominee. We know now that they rigged the system to make sure that that happened. They held relatively few debates. They scheduled them on times where there wouldn't be big audiences, so that if she made mistakes, not many people would see it. They organized what are called super delegates, which are 15 to 17% of all the delegates to the Democratic Convention, in a way that they were going to vote 90, 95% for Hillary. And essentially, we'll never know for sure what would have happened if it had been a totally fair process, but it wasn't a fair process. And the progressives, the anti-establishment types that fought against Hillary and the establishment, they voted for Hillary overwhelmingly still, not for Trump, because Trump's got his own issues and his own strengths and his weaknesses, and I'll be glad to answer questions about that later. But they left that process very, very angry, and that had some effect on some of the rules that I'll get into in a few minutes. There are four major components of the democratic Civil War, and it's a vicious, open war every single day. And you can see it partially reported anywhere you look in the media, even in the mainstream left-leaning channels. They're covering some of the policy debate, some of the battles between the individuals that are in the midst of this Civil War, and I'll get into some of those in a minute. But let's talk about the four major components that characterize this Civil War. The first is the battle over power in the party. And it's exactly the same things that the Tea Party battled over. Who gets to do the endorsements, who are the party officials, who makes the rules. So there's nothing different or unusual there. That's pretty standard within any organizational battle. The second thing is extremely different from what the Republican battle was about. It's a battle of ideology. It's a battle that we haven't seen in this country since the 1970s. It's basically a battle of socialism, or at least radical leftism, versus capitalism and the system that we currently have in this country. And not everybody in the room, but most of you will remember George McGovern. In '68, Nixon beat Hubert Humphrey. George Wallace, interestingly, was the third party leader at that time. He won 5 states. Nixon won the electoral vote fairly comfortably, but the popular vote was fairly close. But if Wallace hadn't been in that election, in that race, Nixon would have won by even more, because most of the Wallace vote would have gone to Nixon, not to McGovern. What people don't remember, at least most of us didn't remember, is how progressive, in quotes, McGovern was. Basically, he was a socialist. He didn't present himself that way. He didn't call himself a socialist, because back then, when a lot of us were growing up, socialism as a concept was absolutely verboten in this country. It was viewed with great negativity. It was essentially, you know, oh, those communists, that Soviet Union, that Russia, they're all, you know, they're socialists. So McGovern didn't call himself a socialist, but effectively he was one. He called himself a progressive Democrat. He was a radical for that period. He lost to Nixon by 23 points. 23 points. And recall that as we move on here. The third point, the third major battle, is over particular policies. And the list is incredibly long. It's already about 20. And I've just listed a few of them up here. And I'm going to touch on them quickly without going into, I don't want to get into a policy discussion, but I want to illustrate the radicalness of where the Democrats are, where some of the Democrats are, including most of their candidates now. So Medicare for all. On the surface, that sounds great, but it's not anything like what you think it is. It isn't just opening up Medicare like I'm on, and many of you are on, to everybody. It is a total reconfiguration and governmentation of the healthcare system, both the payment, the insurance, and the provision of care. Government will take over everything. Private insurance will be illegal. You won't get your healthcare insurance anymore through your employer. It'll come straight from the government with vastly increased taxes on you and your employer to pay for it. Socialism versus capitalism. I don't have to define that for this group. Obviously, you understand that. Abolish the electoral college. Basically, what that means is turn it into an election where it's not done by state, but rather it's done by national popular vote. And of course, the reason why the Democrats want that is because Hillary won by 2.1% in 16, Gore won by 0.5% in 2000. They feel they were screwed by the structure of the system that the Constitution dictates, and so they want to change that. Pack the Supreme Court. Some of the candidates want to add 6 new justices to the 9-member Supreme Court so they can pack it with liberals. Fortunately, some of the other Democrats and a lot of independents, Republicans point out, oh, well, if you can pack it when you're president, we can pack it again when we're president. So 9 becomes 15, becomes 25, and God knows where things go from there. But that's a very radical idea. And to actually make that change takes a constitutional amendment, which is one of the reasons why it's probably not going to happen, because any 13 states can block a constitutional amendment. You have to have 3/4 of the states approving any amendment. That means it just takes 13 to block one. And the reason why I don't think it's going to happen is there are 30 states that get more power because of the electoral vote system. And there's 20 states that lose power. So who do you think is going to win there? The states that get more power. Abortion up to birth. In fact, it even goes to the point where the Virginia governor, who happens to be a pediatrician, believe it or not, is actually in favor of infanticide. If a baby's born by accident and the mother doesn't want it, the baby can be killed, just left to die by not providing care. So this is a very, very radical idea that almost nobody in the American electorate supports. The American electorate is very divided on abortion, almost 50-50. But by about 80-20, the American electorate is willing to put all sorts of restrictions on how easy it is to get abortions. Parental consent, sonograms, only the first trimester, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'll just end with this one, the Green New Deal. That is ridiculous. In 10 years, we're going to get rid of fossil fuels. We're going to get rid of airplanes. We're going to get rid of steel and glass buildings like Mayor de Blasio in New York just proposed. It's absurd. It's absolutely, totally absurd. The fourth component of the Civil War is identity politics. Groups rather than individual identity. Group identity versus individual identity and individual ideas and capabilities and things. And you see here the 5 major components of this identity politics. Whites versus minorities. So we've got candidates like Joe Biden and Beto O'Rourke and Pete Buttigieg from South Bend versus Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Julian Castro from Texas. So you've got the classic minority versus white battle. And remember, the Democratic Party, about half of their votes, almost half of their votes are minority votes, including in the primaries. And that's a crucial thing to remember. The Democrats that turn out in general elections are vastly a bigger group than the Democrats that vote in primaries. Republicans are the same way. So the activists in both of the parties are more important in that regard than the general election voters are. Young versus old. There's this horror that a lot of the young folks have and a lot of middle-aged folks of electing, especially an ancient 70-something white male. I kind of like that idea since I'm an ancient 70-something white male, but that is a horror to a lot of the millennials and a lot of other folks. Male versus female. Again, the women in this country vote about 55 to 60% for the Democrats. That's what we call the gender gap. And it's a party dominated by women voters, but Hillary wasn't able to get over the top with playing that card in 16. We'll see what happens this year. And this establishment versus newcomer, this is again at the core of what the Sanders revolt was all about, more than his radical socialism. It was more that he was an outsider fighting against the establishment. So I can't emphasize that enough as a priority in this battle. And then there's the coastal versus the heartland. The vast majority of the candidates are from the coastal states, Pacific and Atlantic, but there's some key heartland folks as well. Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, who is a kind of halfway between the establishment liberals and the progressive radicals in terms of her policy positions. John Hickenlooper, who has relatives here in Cincinnati. He's not from Cincinnati, but there's Hickenloopers here in town. So at any rate, that is a heartland versus the East and the West Coast. So I mentioned earlier party rules. Party rules, as you well know, are very, very important. Let's look at 3 types of party rules the Democrats have that are going to be crucial in framing the choice of their candidate and in a material way affecting the outcome of their nomination process. The first is the debates. They've already got 12 scheduled debates. It's basically one a month starting next month, believe it or not. They made really a stupid set of decisions on who gets into the initial 2 debates, or the initial 4 debates, because there's going to be 2 in June on a Wednesday night and a Thursday night, and then 2 more in July on 2 nights. And to get in, you can get in 2 different ways. You can be at 1% or more in the national polls, or you can have donations from 65,000 or more people. That later component is very easy to manipulate. In fact, they've got one candidate that's paying people $2 for a $1 donation so that he gets to 65,000, and he has. So they're going to have between 20 and 25 candidates on the stage, on 2 stages, on consecutive nights. And you remember how crazy the Republican debates were? This is going to be even crazier. And it's not going to be the major leagues and the minor leagues. It's going to be by lot, by random, as who gets on which night. And there's only going to be 3 or 4 minutes for each candidate. So they're all going to be grandstanding, trying to get attention. And they're already regretting their decision, but it's too late to change it. But they are going to change it as we get to September's debates. They're going to skip August. As we get to September debates, they're going to narrow the field down. They haven't made up the rules yet about how they're going to do that. But it'll probably involve the national polls and maybe getting to 3% or something instead of 1%. And they'll probably get rid of the money stuff because that hasn't worked at all, because that can be too easily manipulated. The second key thing is the delegate allegation in their primaries. The Republican Party allows the state parties to set up the caucuses and the primaries. And there are some rules, but they're fairly loose. And so the Republicans can set things up so whoever wins the state gets every delegate from that state. Or they can be allocated proportionately. So if you get to a certain level, maybe 15, 20%, you get your fraction of the delegates. If you only get 5%, you don't get any. But if you're one of the top 2 or 3 vote getters, you get proportional delegates. The Democratic Party is 100% proportional. And again, they have a 15% threshold. You have to get to that minimum. But if you get there, you get a proportion of the delegates. Well, what does that do? Think about, I don't think 20 or 25 Democrats are going to get to the first votes in Iowa, which is in February of next year. But they're probably going to be 8 or 10 to get that far. So in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, and then on Super Tuesday, which is on March 3rd, when about half of the delegates across the entire country are going to be available, because it's almost turning into a national primary that day, you're going to have anywhere from 3 to 6 of the candidates winning substantial numbers of delegates in the various states. It's going to be very, very difficult for any candidate by the July convention to win 50%. So there's going to be a lot of candidates that come into the convention with 10%, 20%, 30%, but not enough to get to the 50% that's required to get the nomination. So it's highly likely that the Democratic convention next summer, not this summer, but next summer, is going to go to multiple ballots, multiple votes. One of the ironies, and one of the things that's going to be a powder keg politically, is that these superdelegates that are unelected, they're state party officials, some of them elected, but mostly party officials, not elected officials, are the superdelegates. They're the ones that threw the election to the nomination to Hillary last time. They get to vote on the second ballot. The progressives got snookered into letting that happen, thinking, oh, well, we haven't had a brokered convention, a multi-ballot convention for generations. Well, they're likely to have one this time. So it could be that, let's say Joe Biden has 30% in the first ballot and the superdelegates put him over on the second ballot. The millennials and the Sanders folks are going to go berserk with anger. So those process things matter. And finally, let me end with implications. There's a massive internal war going on in the party as we speak. It's overwhelming. You could see it every day in the battles between the candidates over issues, over ideology. And think about it. We're 18 months from the November 2020 election. 18 months, and we're already so engaged in these battles. The second thing to keep in mind is how divided the party has become because of all these divides and these battles. And the third thing to keep in mind is the anger that's likely, the residual anger that's likely to be there even after they nominate somebody, because you've got all of these divisions and all these battles that have been fought out and not resolved until late July of 2020. So that's what the Civil War is all about. Those are the characteristics of it. And, ask away with your questions about that, or say anything you want to about politics. Yep, in the back.
Can you wait till we bring a microphone to you? I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, if anyone has a question, raise your hand and let me get the microphone to you.
Do you think that Do you think that sloppy Joe Biden is going to get the Communist Party nomination?
The Joe Biden has some real strengths and weaknesses. And one of the things that's at the bottom, I do a weekly blog called the Tuchfarber Report. And if anybody wants to get a couple free issues of that, just email me at this number, which is on your handout at this email address. I'm going to be going through gradually over the months, analyzing the different candidates. Last week, I analyzed the strengths and weaknesses of Bernie Sanders, which I'm not going to go over. Biden has some real strengths and weaknesses. He's by far the best known candidate, which is why he's so far ahead in the polls now. But that's mostly name recognition. The average American voter doesn't know much about Joe Biden other than his name. So he's got the tremendous advantage. He's got the capability of raising big money, not in small donations like a lot of the candidates do, but in big money, because he's Mr. Establishment. He's who the insiders want to be nominated. But he's a walking gaffe machine. And I'm serious about it, and Democrats would tell you that. Yesterday in Iowa, and this has been played up all over the news, he said basically China's not a competitor of ours. They're not a problem. That's absurd. China's our biggest adversary on the planet, economically, militarily, politically, et cetera, et cetera. He sticks his foot in his mouth and twists it all the time. And whether or not he can prevail over time is anybody's guess. If I was forced to vote or to bet today, my bet would be that Bernie Sanders would get the nomination, but I would only rate that 20 to 25%. All the other candidates, including Biden, would be 75 to 80% likely as a group. But remember how crazy it was with Republicans. Do you remember that Governor Walker of Wisconsin was at one time the leading Republican candidate, and Jeb Bush and others that just totally disappeared? And Walker disappeared, didn't even get to Iowa. So stay tuned. Don't make any assumptions about who's likely to go ahead.
My name is Rose, and I'm a proud Tea Party person. And my question is this. First of all, I'm making a statement. I consider every Democrat in the Democrat Party Marxist. Some are unmasked, and some continue to wear the mask, but they're all Marxists.
Okay, we need to get to your question.
Okay. I forgot it. Just give me a second. Okay.
Let's come back to her in a minute.
We have a situation where certain states are saying that they're going to base their electoral delegates on the national count,
right,
instead of their own. How's that going to play out?
That's the National Popular Vote Compact. Right now, they've got states that have about 200 electoral votes. That does not kick in any of those states until they get to 270. They've already got every state that's Democratic controlled. There's almost no likelihood they can get the additional Republican states to agree to that idea. So it's very, very unlikely. It's not a zero probability, but it's very unlikely that that can kick in for the 2020 election. It's also very unlikely the Electoral College gets changed. It's essentially impossible to change it before 2020 because the amendment process takes forever, takes years usually. So we're highly likely to have the standard electoral vote system for 2020. Whether we'll have it permanently is an open question. But again, this national popular vote compact is highly unlikely to affect 2020.
We have a online viewer who is wondering if you have an opinion on whether Michelle Obama might enter as a candidate.
That is a spectacular question. Thank you. She will not, she's almost certain not to jump in early. But think about what I've talked about with the divisions in the party. Imagine this scenario. This war is going on. Biden falls by the wayside, so there's no strong leader in the party. It looks like the party's going to go into the primaries and caucuses in February in total disarray. It is not at all impossible that either Michelle Obama or Hillary Clinton will jump in November, because that's still time to get on the ballots for the primaries and the caucuses. So I'm not predicting that. I'd say maybe the odds of either of them getting in is 20%, and don't take that as, don't add 20 and 20 and say it's 40%. I'm saying that there's about one chance in 5 that one or the other will jump in very late because the party is so divided and they're able to sell themselves as the savior of the party. So again, thanks to the viewer.
We have another question back here.
I'm curious your thoughts. It seems like the Democrats are anti-Semitic in their policies, and yet you look at Hollywood and some of the places where you think there would be more Jewish votes that would be against how they behave, and yet they seem to continue to have support from the Jewish community.
You're exactly right, and the Jewish vote historically has been 70% Democratic. I don't think it's going to change much, even with the anti-Semitism that's being written and talked about every day. And the reason for that is the social issues, and a lot of the American Jews, and I have many that are friends, and the Russian Jews and Polish Jews and German Jews, et cetera, the only political parties that would represent them back in the old world were the socialists. Their grandparents and their parents came here as socialists. That's what they grew up with. That plus the social issues, that and the tradition of voting Democratic keeps and will keep most of the Jewish vote Democratic, although again, it may well be down from 70% down to 60 or maybe 65%. But there's not going to be a massive shift.
Now we have another question from a viewer online. Some states are passing legislation that Trump cannot be on the ballot unless he releases his tax return. Do you think this is legal? I think it's dubious. And do you think it will end up hurting the election in any way?
The Constitution is clear on what the requirements are for president. You have to be 35. You have to be born as a citizen. You don't have to be born in the country, but you have to be born to citizens. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but as I see it, and as what people that I respect see it, it's unconstitutional to put a provision like that on.
Yes, I'd like to, you brought back the angry voters. I know a lot of Democrats, and because I was union member and stuff, and I know there's a lot of division within those people I know, and they're still quite angry because of what happened to Bernie Sanders.
Right.
And the Democrat Party to this point has been able to play that anger. How long do you think they can do this? I mean, I think that anger becomes wore out in a while, don't you? I mean, it seems to me, but they're going to need to do that because the only chance they've got is to create anger to have a vote for against Trump, because they don't really have issues to win on.
Your analysis is dead on, but remember how powerful the anti-Trump feelings are. And there's about 40% in the country that just hate Trump with a passion. There's about 40% that love Trump with a passion. And then there's about 20% who will decide our elections. And they like some things, they hate Trump's tone and style, but they love his policies and his successes. That's the dynamic that's going to play out once the Democrats have a nominee, regardless of whether it's Biden or Sanders or Michelle Obama or whomever. It's people, lots of analysts are making, I think, a huge mistake in saying this next election is all about Trump. That's not right. There are going to be two candidates. There are going to be two platforms. There's going to be pluses and minuses for both of them. It's going to be a battle between two human beings with strengths and weaknesses. And Trump has a tremendous advantage because he's an elected president. And we've only had 3 elected presidents defeated for re-election in the last 100 years. That's about 20% of the time that we've had an elected incumbent defeated. That's probably a good estimate of the odds that Trump has of being re-elected, 80%. And again, he has tremendous weaknesses, especially on tone and style. But on substance, the economy's great, deregulation's great, lots of other good stuff is happening. So he's got real advantages and real strengths to go with his weakness. There was a question here.
Hi, my name is Leslie. The media is often seen as if they're an extension of the Democratic Party. They're not known for being fair and balanced, so we couldn't expect them to do an expose on Biden's past connections with Ukraine, for instance. So how do you see, do they have a role in this civil war going on in the Democratic Party as far as picking losers and winners, since they have a lot of influence?
Well, two things. They have a role, and they are picking. Individuals in the media have their own favorites, and it shows up with the questions they ask, the analysis that they do. And so that's going to affect some of the vote. But most of the activists are not going to be moved by that stuff. They're going to be moved by their own personal predilections. The other thing to keep in mind is the media is not nearly as powerful as we think it is. And you might say, oh, well, he's out of his mind saying that. If the media was as powerful as we think it is, we would have never had a President Nixon. We would have never had a President Reagan. We would have never had either of the President Bushes. We would have never had a President Trump. The media's got much less power than you think and that you fear. That doesn't mean it's not important. It's crucially important, but it's not anywhere close to dominant in its control of American public opinion, and especially on presidential voting. Presidential voting is the only voting that the average American does where they actually know something about the two candidates. I know that's terrible to say, but that's just a fact. And so it's on the presidential vote, that is a sacred right that people spend some time on.
I have a question about this whole issue of impeachment and the analogy to Clinton and what it really did to help him. And, the Democrats are walking this line. What do you really think about the impact of an impeachment decision?
I've been writing about that for 2 years, and I haven't changed my opinion at all. Anybody that's a Republican or conservative ought to hope that they start the impeachment process. Because what happened with Clinton, and what happened with Trump too, is Clinton got more popular during that year of '98. He went from 60% approval to 70% during his impeachment year. And he was actually impeached in '98 and then not removed by the Senate in '99. It would be the best thing that could happen to the Republican Party and to Trump, because it would infuriate the Republican base and infuriate a lot of independents and swing voters, this middle 20%. And they decide all of our elections. And so my prediction is, and in fact, there's stories out today that the Democrats in the Senate are saying, no way, don't even start down that path, because there's no way that we, the Democrats, can get 20 Republicans to join us in a vote to remove Trump, even if he's impeached by the House. So my prediction is not going to happen, but I know a lot of Republicans that are hoping that they start the process, because it will absolutely infuriate a substantial majority of the American electorate.
We have a question here.
Is there any potential for a convention of states in the future?
I don't think so. And that would be, if you're a conservative, and I am, that would be really, really dangerous, because there's no institutionalized way to control what they would do. And my belief is that there will not be a convention of states in my lifetime, and I hope to live another 30 years. So that's basically my answer. In the back here.
Yeah. My question, I have a little bit of trepidation about labor, the labor vote, white labor. And the reason why I do is, and maybe you could help with this, with my concern, there's labor in the regular, you know, non-department, non-government labor. Is government labor like in the federal government?
Okay, I think I know where you're going, and I've done a lot of research on this, and I can be very, very specific. Slightly more than half of all the union voters out there are now in public sector unions. Slightly less than half, maybe 45%, are in private unions. About half of all government workers are in a government union, about half. In the private sector, the unionized workforce is down to 6%. 6%. And the total is about 11% if you take both groups and put them together. In the last election, the private sector union members voted majority for Trump. There's a massive movement of the white working class to Trump. It ties right back to the coalition discussion we started with, which is one of the reasons why I brought that up. So the private labor vote is now Republican, which nobody's writing about and should be, whereas the public union vote is about 2-to-1 Democratic. And but the total labor vote has fallen to only about 11% of the workforce, and less than that in terms of the voting.
Hi, my name's Gary. Thanks for coming and speaking. We read articles and we see so-called undercover video clips regarding voter fraud. What's your opinion on the realistic point of voter fraud?
It's at this point, on a nationwide basis, it's a small but growing problem. In some states like California, where they've changed the rules, it's a major problem. And this so-called vote harvesting that is now legal in California is a travesty. It is fraud, because basically anybody can go out and intercept a potential voter, declare that they ask them if they're legal and registered, take their vote and turn it in without the voter ever dealing with the election officials. That's a travesty. It begs for fraud. But again, on a national basis, it's a small but growing problem, and every state needs to be dealing with that. And of course, in the Democratic states, they're trying to put fewer restrictions in rather than in the Republican states where they're putting more in.
My name is Ken. With the fascination on the Mueller report, et cetera, is the House of Representatives and the Senate actually getting any work done right now?
No. A simple answer is no. They've passed almost nothing of substance, and everything they passed is being ignored in the Republican Senate. So it is, and I predicted this months ago. I predicted the Republicans are going to be running against a new do-nothing Congress. And that's exactly what we have. And the voters, the American public, starting to pick up on this. And the numbers of Americans, including independents, and that's the most important swing group, increasingly are saying, get on with the business of the country. Forget the Mueller report and all these investigations. And the national polls are all, including the national polls done by the liberals, or for the liberals, are all saying the same thing, that's the direction.
So if you take Biden and Sanders out of the equation, which of all these candidates do you think can best navigate these Civil War issues you talk about and appeal to that 20%?
Somebody like a John Hickenlooper from Colorado, who's a true centrist, a rarity in the Democratic Party. Now, the odds of him getting the nomination are very, very low because he's not well known. He's known to be, and this is a bad pun, but it's true, he's known to be a little loopy with some crazy ideas. But he would appeal to the center, the true centrists, the independents, more so than, say, a Sanders or a Kamala Harris or a Beto O'Rourke from Texas. But it's such a morass, 20, 25 candidates. We just had a new one come in today. Senator Bennett from Colorado came in today. There's probably going to be a handful more. And then we've got the potential of Hillary or Michelle coming in the fall. I mean, it's just, I can't even think of all the scenarios that could happen.
Who do you think would be the easiest candidate for Trump to beat, and who do you think would be the most difficult?
Great question. The easiest would be Sanders, because he's such a proud socialist. And you in this room know that. But the average voter, including this key middle 20%, doesn't know that yet. The analysts, the experts, mistakenly think that the American public knows who these high-level Democrats are, including Biden. None of them, not one of them, has ever been really strongly vetted, strongly tested by the national media, both conservative and liberal. They're unknowns. And right now, a lot of what's going on is name recognition. Who would be the toughest to beat? Probably Biden if he survives. Personally, I don't think he's going to survive, but if he happened to survive, he would be the toughest to beat because he's relatively well known.
Not that he would take your advice, but what advice would you give Trump to do or accomplish to strengthen his like and swing that middle and soften the hatred?
Nothing's going to soften the hatred. Nothing. It's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. As we go through the 18 months, the anger is going to ratchet up. It's going to be really, really ugly, which is really unfortunate. But that's just what I think is going to happen. He can't change. He's got a clear image now. Once you get a clear image as a public figure, it's almost impossible to change. He can dial back the tweets. He can dial back some of the attacks, especially on his allies that he should not be attacking. Political allies, I mean. But he cannot substantially change his image. And that's why I say it's so important who the Democratic contender is. Because it's going to be a battle between, you know, a guy and another guy, or Trump and a woman. And the Democrat's going to have strengths and weaknesses. And that will then be a choice between those two. And I don't think any major third party, I did Howard Schultz, for example, I don't think is going to get 5% of the vote. And if he runs, he'll pull more from the Democrats. He is a Democrat. He's a socially liberal, fiscally conservative Democrat. So if he does run, and I think he's going to, he'll pull more from whoever the Democrat is than he will from Trump. But there's not a whole lot that Trump can do to change his image at this point. It's well established.
My name is Jerry. I have a fundamental question. You know, I look at Bernie Sanders, who is a millionaire and has probably gained that under capitalism. Why are they socialists, and are most Democrats considered socialists?
Most Democrats are not socialists. And half of the candidates, actually, well, more like a third of the candidates, are not left-wing radicals either. But 2/3 of them are. But the party base is not socialist. It leans left, but you know, the party base is 40% of all the voters. So that's almost 60 million people. And the Republican base is about the same size. So it's a heck of a lot of folks and an incredible amount of diversity. But the activists in the party, the people that vote in the primaries and caucuses, are fairly radical left. And that's why I think there's a 60% chance that one of the radical Dems is going to get the nomination. And I think we're going to have a quite clear policy battle, political battle at the end here. And that's just the way it reads. But again, we've got 18 months to go. You know, all sorts of craziness. Let's take 2 last questions, one from each side.
Hi, I'm Teresa from Mara, Ohio, and I have a quick, what do you think that the young adults, college age, how they will lean to vote? Do you think they're going to buy this Green New Deal socialism, pay all my student loans? Or do you think that they will look at the what Trump is trying to do, bringing jobs back with the economy and everything, or if they will kind of lean towards conservative?
They will vote Democratic by close to 2-1. That's their current rating. Now, the good news for conservatives is that most of them don't vote. You know, people our age turn out and vote. It's just the social phenomena that voter turnout really doesn't start to go up a lot until we get into our 40s. You know, we've got a house and a mortgage and property taxes and kids and et cetera, et cetera. That's when voting rates really go up a lot. But the millennials who vote are going to vote probably 60-40 or 2/3 Democrat, 2/3 Republican because of all this giveaway crap. And, you know, and they don't understand economics, and they don't understand ideology. They don't understand what socialism, how destructive socialism really is. They don't understand Venezuela. They couldn't find Venezuela on the map. So that is already kind of baked in to the reality, but there's many other groups, including this generation, that is going to be a strong Republican vote. One last question.
We've got 2 questions online.
Okay, that's fine.
So we'll end with those.
That's fine.
We have actually 2 separate questions, both basically the same question, asking your opinion about the chances of 2 of the Democrats, one being Mayor Pete and the other Julian Castro.
Start with Julian Castro. He's gained no traction at all. He's at 1% in the national polls. He's in 3rd or 4th place in Texas, his own state. So the odds of him catching fire, especially with Beto O'Rourke in the race, is very, very low. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, the gay Democrat mayor of South Bend, Indiana, he's been the flavor of the week for the last week, now being replaced by Biden as the flavor of the week since he jumped in officially. And Buttigieg's polls had been going like this, straight up from essentially 0 to 6 or 8%. They're now, they've peaked and maybe even turned down a little bit. I'm not ruling anybody out at this point because, again, the first vote doesn't occur until 9 months from now. So it's a long, long time. Anything can happen. But like I say, you have to discount these new candidates that become the flavor of the week and see if they have any staying power, and especially see what happens after we've had debates in June and July. By the time we get to September, there will be some clear losers that are going to drop out, and there will be some people that are emerging, just like Trump emerged. And basically, Trump emerged, he came in on June 16th of 2015. He didn't really emerge and take off in the polls until July, to the first debate. So stay tuned, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Al. That was great. I know I learned tonight. I hope all of you learned something you didn't know, found it interesting. I just want to give you a little flavor for our next semester. I booked our first class today for December 17th. How many here were at the Doris Day class on Tuesday? A few. Well, we're going to do something like that again on December 17th. We're going to have Rosemary Clooney and Doris Day for Christmas memories. So put that on your calendar. And just to remind you, our next class will be June 6th. I hope to see all of you there, and be careful going home. Thanks for coming. Other thing, Al didn't ask me to say this, but when I looked at him, it reminded me. I do subscribe to the Tuchfarber report, and I recommend it. I do enjoy reading it.